So I suppose we begin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. That's okay? Yeah. I am Odile Conchot. I am a senior advisor at the French Agency of Development in Paris, based in Paris. And I'm really happy to moderate this panel, and thanks to the GDN to invite me to do so. This panel is a crucial topic on financing biodiversity, conservation, and nature-based solutions for sustainability challenges. So as we heard yesterday, COP15, with the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, gave us a way to go for halting and reversing biodiversity loss. But now, in conjunction also with the action to combat climate change and also poverty and reduce poverty. But now it's time to implement that. It's time to act at global, national and local levels, with all the actors that have to be to work with, either for the public and the private actors side, but also with the civil society and with IPLCs. We've heard that also yesterday several times. The time is running out. We just have 7 years or almost 6 years before 2030. And so we have to act now, as we said. And we all know that this task is absolutely not easy. And it implies a profound transformation of our public policies, of our economies, and the way they are financed also. For this purpose, the Global Biodiversity Framework mentioned that public and private financial flows have to be aligned with the targets and goals of the GBF. And you've heard yesterday what they are. It's, as I said, it's not an easy task. So adequate and sustainable financing is therefore required to ensure that the protection of biodiversity, the preservation of ecosystems, the restoration of them, and the sustainable use also of biodiversity, of nature, can become a universal reality. David Cooper yesterday mentioned the huge amount of money that is required to finance the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So this morning, this panel will explore the complexity of financing biodiversity in a sustainable way. It will also examine the different financing mechanisms, policy frameworks, and public-private partnerships that are being developed or still or already used, and that can help mobilize resources in a positive way for nature. It will also question the use of current money. We have trillions of dollars per year spent. And in relation, but are they well spent? Are they spent in relation to biodiversity and also climate change and poverty issues? So that will be also one of the main points to discuss. And finally, our panel will discuss the importance of integrated local population, notably women, in decision-making related to nature and the environment and in the local implementation of the policies. So all that in 1 hour and a third. The session will take the form of a discussion. It will be a bit different from yesterday with our 4 panelists, and I hope we will have time for Q&A session with all of you. So it's now time for me to present and to introduce, and it's my pleasure to introduce the 4 panelists. So Luisa Montes, ladies first. You are the founder and director of Ecovalores and the CSO of Senco.
Central de Corretajes.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to try, but and you are based in Mexico. Camilo Santa, sorry. You are a specialist in biodiversity and nature capital in the Natural Capital Lab at the Inter-American Development Bank. Online, we have Sébastien Treyer. He is the executive director of the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations in Paris, in France. And Christian Peter, I don't know if Christian is online already. He will arrive, I hope. And Christian is a practice manager for the Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economies Global Platform Unit at the World Bank. So, Ladies and gentlemen, as I just said before, COP15 called for an alignment of public and private flows with the goal and targets of the GBF, which means an increase in finance for nature positive, equitable, and also net zero actions, but also a decrease in flows with negative impacts on biodiversity. What I would like to know now, and that you tell us, is how can governments, international institutions, and civil society work together to foster transparency, accountability, and effective governance in financial flows for biodiversity conservation and sustainability? So, Sébastien, you will be the first. Can you answer this question? And above all, perhaps tell us what are the current trends in this area and what financial institutions beyond governments, local authority can do for that, and explain us what are the main issues with financing biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Odile. Buenos días a todas y todos. Hello, good morning to all. I hope you can hear me well. Is that okay, Odile? Can you hear me?
Yes, that's okay.
Thank you. Maybe the main point that I would like to put on the table after listening to your question, Odile, is to say that we live in a world where access to finance is particularly difficult for vulnerable countries and least developed countries. And in that context, what I can identify as a major challenge is that we need to support communities and countries, those who are developing a nature positive and equitable development pathway. And in particular, when those projects by local communities, by indigenous people, or by countries is being challenged by more extractive models of development. And I think it's very important, as the conference is taking place in Quito, to put the emphasis on the case of Ecuador, that has democratically said no to the oil extraction in IPLC's territories with high biodiversity and carbon importance. And that's extremely important. That is an example of a country and of a community that has chosen another pathway for development over the reliance on oil. And this is exactly the type of territory of communities that we need to support to find a way that will durably, over a longer period of time, ensure that more extractive models of development are not going to be chosen afterwards. And so that's what I think. What is important is that in those cases, and I take the example of Ecuador, but there might be many others around the planet, the idea is to help communities build a sustainable development project. And what we want to build is not that we want to protect biodiversity as a no development project. There is a sustainable development project behind protecting biodiversity in those areas. And we need to find ways to what are the investments for sustainable development in those areas. So what I think, and I'm nearly finished answering your question, Odile, is that first, we probably, in financial institutions, both private and public, and governments need to help these communities express their project, their vision of their future as an investment plan, as something that is palatable to investors. Because what is needed is, what I hear from communities in different areas and countries is that they need investments. They don't need money for no development. They need investment. They need finance for investments in those territories. And what I see is also that these projects are structurally lacking access to investment capacities, as I said, particularly when they are located in vulnerable or least developed countries. But also in these countries, these projects that favor biodiversity protection at the heart of a project for sustainable development are generally lacking access to investment because they are less convincing in terms of return on investment, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, they are, in a first analysis by the financial sector, less attractive for investors. And on top of that, I think you've positioned that already, Odile. These projects are in competition over scarce public resources, public financial resource, but also they are also in competition on markets with subsidies and financial flows that support more extractive models of development. And so what I think is needed here is that public policies need to be developed And we need also to ensure that public money is repurposed, that the subsidies are repurposed towards projects that are good for the sustainable development, for nature positive, equitable, and as you said, also low carbon model of development. I think this is, I'm also insisting that we need also to see how public money can be leveraging, how we can leverage the intervention of public money in supply chains to ensure that the supply chains and the markets that could be developed around those areas are ensuring enough added value is captured in those territories. So that would be my way to position the challenge, particularly taking as example what has happened recently in Ecuador.
Thanks a lot. Oh, that's a very useful introduction, Sébastien. So what I noticed of what you said, a change of model in the economy based on a very important relationship, partnership, and work with communities that need investments and perhaps specific investment, new model of investments, and on the other way, a need of public policies to be developed in order to avoid negative financing for biodiversity, and also public finance to leverage, to finance, to invest, but also to leverage private finance, more or less, if I can summarize. So based on that, I turn to the development banks, to the multilateral development banks who have both too. I don't know if Christian is connected. Christian, are you there? So I hope Christian will be connected. So I come directly to you, Camillo, based on what we've heard just now with Sébastien. What is the Inter-American Bank doing in order to fulfill this requirements to finance biodiversity on all these aspects we have seen, and perhaps more, how are you helping countries to do so, and perhaps more especially in your area of interventions?
Thank you, Odile. Primero quisiera agradecer a los organizadores del evento. Un saludo muy especial para la Tierra del Cóndor. Es muy bonito estar aquí con ustedes hoy. I'll speak in English, but I just wanted to greet everyone and say hi. I mean, resonating a little bit with the conversation yesterday, I do agree that the conversation should be around the nature of value rather than the value of nature. Very interesting panels that we had yesterday. But at the Inter-American Development Bank, and what we have been working on for these past years, since the Paris Agreement evolved in this understanding of nature being at the core of the climate agenda, and that it had actually been left out, and how to transition from these extractive industries and extractive economies to a much more regenerative economy. The Natural Capital Lab has been working, understanding how can it take in nature and natural capital and ecosystem services into the accounting, not only of the business models, but also into national accounts. So first thing is, we have been advising countries across Latin America and the Caribbean to value natural capital and ecosystem services, and take them into account into the national planning and national accounts to understand what is the risk of biodiversity loss, what is the risk of losing species for economic purposes, for financial purposes, but also for human purposes and for the sustainability of our species. And in that sense, we have made the agreements, and now how we take them into action is the big question that we were having yesterday. And the Montreal Kunming agreement is like a Paris agreement for biodiversity, setting the scene of how are we setting the targets on biodiversity. And for example, is instruments like debt for nature swaps, trust funds, biodiversity credits, species bonds, blue bonds, thematic bonds, private bonds, treasury bonds, and these other kind of, which I'll get into in a couple of seconds, can be arranged and used and mixing and matching, as we like to say. But then first thing is also understanding that closing the biodiversity gap should start by understanding the flows that we are actually having. And this is basically with the conversation we were having with Christian and you, Odile, in the sense that at least 50% of the biodiversity funding gap could be covered just by redirecting subsidies, negative subsidies that we actually have of extractive industries and contamination, polluted industries into nature positive flows. So that's first. Second, and using the example of what Ecuador has achieved, which is a very important milestone globally, which is using the instrument of blue bonds to get private investors coming in, investing to create a trust fund that can buy debt, national debt, and then this swap of the past debt for a future debt with a reduction or a savings, and then putting some money into conservation to fund Galapagos is so very interesting. I mean, we don't have the time to go into the specifics and details of this, but I'll just shoot two numbers which are very interesting. It is for long the highest and the biggest transaction with a debt reduction of over $900 million and 450 million set aside specifically for the conservation of the Galapagos. We'll go into details of that further.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Camilo. Yes. So, supporting the countries, supporting your clients, raising awareness, explaining what are the risks and dependencies, also linked to biodiversity loss. That's the main part of your action, and for sure, investing, financing, but also developing new financing mechanism. You are doing a lot at the Inter-American Development Bank, so a good example to see what a multilateral development bank is doing. And we had yesterday the example of the African Development Bank. I would like to have the example of the World Bank, but I don't think Christian is connected. So Luisa, I come to you, and perhaps we come with you more to the private side. And I would like you to explain to all of us what the private finance can do with biodiversity. It's not so new. I would say it began 2-3 years ago to see the private finance coming to this topic after the climate. Yes. So can you explain what you are doing and what can be done and what are the main challenges?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to also thank the organizers, the GDN, and particularly to Elena Lazos for inviting me. I really have enjoyed very much the conference and knowing Quito. And well, as I was introduced, Central de Corretajes, which is a very hard word to say, is also the owner of the second stock exchange in Mexico. So I work for this second stock exchange. And this second stock exchange was born with the idea of being a very green exchange. So we focus very much on green bonds and sustainable bonds and those kind of like linked bonds, like some kind of bonds that have a different issue, no? And that's what we've been doing. But I have to tell you that ever since 2006, when this study by Lord Stern was introduced, saying that we need to invest 1 or 2% of GDP to avoid losing almost 20% of the GDP for the loss that we have to encounter, or that we are perceiving that we are going to have to finance due to climate change. We are even there. The financial sector is there, is almost starting to understand what these risks on climate change are going to be. In particularly in Mexico, I think nature has given us a very big blow with Acapulco. Acapulco is destroyed last week. And I think it's the first time that the financial sector is going to really take a look at it. So I'm very sad to tell you that we are only starting to see the biodiversity side. So mainstreaming biodiversity is going to take more time. we are on the carbon, we are on the carbon market and beginning the carbon market and increasing the pace to have financial instruments in the carbon market. And the biodiversity side is going to take a little bit more time. We're working with companies to asking them to tell us what is your biodiversity, how are you bringing biodiversity into your value and into your financial flows. Most companies are answering, no, we really don't have an impact on biodiversity because, you know, our operations are in areas where they are not biodiversity rich. So it's going to take a little bit more time and more working with the companies to really tell them, well, you know, maybe it's not in your operation, but maybe in your value chain. You need to look at your value chain because right now you're not analyzing that. And thankfully in Mexico, we have CONABIO, which is our own Commission for Biodiversity, and they have very good information in their webpage. So we're asking companies, why don't you take a look at the webpage? They really have like very geo-referenced information, so they can get the information of what areas are they impacting and what particularly biodiversity issues are important in that area. But it's just beginning. Really, they're not looking at the biodiversity impact yet. That's in one part. And if I have just 2 more minutes, we're also we're working on the development of a carbon market that includes water and biodiversity. And that's as I am since a year ago the CSO of the exchange. This is I'm bringing it to the table. But still, the really financial people are looking at me like, what are you talking about? Why biodiversity? Why water? So it's really important. One thing that I have to say that in Mexico, we already have the sustainability taxonomy. So people are looking at, oh, okay, it's in this list. We need to go to the list of the taxonomy. And it's a little bit helping. It's helping a little bit. But I have only 1 minute yet. But we will come back to the taxonomy and the importance that it has in the financial sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Luisa. Yeah, it's beginning everywhere with the private sector. You mentioned the stock exchange. You could have also mentioned the central bank in Mexico. They are also acting a lot, and the role of these organizations are really important to explain to, as you are doing on another way, to the banks and to the private sector also what can be done, what is the market, so importance of developing taxonomy tools, data also, and finally opportunities of financing. So thanks a lot. Christian is there. So Christian, welcome.
I'm so sorry. I really apologize. It has been, everything went wrong. After 3 or 4 years of COVID, that we're still struggling with these things. I really apologize.
Don't worry, that's okay.
Sorry. Really
it's your turn now to explain to all of us what the World Bank is doing in terms of financing biodiversity. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So again, thanks for the invitation and profound apologies for not being able to join you at the time when I was supposed to do this. I think what you may have heard and what we have through the last couple of months going, we have a new president, and I think what we really want to make sure is that the livable planet theme is something that is very critical to the World Bank mission, because we see nature or biodiversity as a development issue. It's something that is critical for any economy. It's something that needs to be really mainstream, not only mainstream, but also put on the forefront. And the reason for this is that if we are not looking at the different compounding crises which we have, climate, pollution, and nature or biodiversity, we really will undermine the basis for what development is about, the basis for what the future of our economies is about. So what we have been really trying to focus on over the past couple of years is twofold. One is financing green, So increasing investment to projects that really promote nature conservation, but also incorporate nature solutions into investment. And then on the other side of the coin is what we call greening finance. Sorry, that's the other one, which is really looking at how can we help the finance sector to become better and greener, so to really address issues such as harmful subsidies, repurposing these subsidies, really providing sort of internal revenues that economies are currently spending and not really and these are often compounding the already existing degradation of the environment. So these are the two main thrusts which we're working on. I think what we also have been focusing much, and since our colleague is there from IDB, we have as MDBs, we're really looking forward to foster partnerships, working together on the ground, because I do think that we have in too many countries sort of traditionally work in parallel or in competition to each other. And I do think that having an understanding that really brings these different threats together, really make sure that we have a partnership with the government, sitting together, looking at what are the programs, what are the situation, what is the fiscal situation, what is the financial situation of the country, what's the fiscal risk, what are the climate risks, and what are the nature risks. And so I think it is very important to have a full understanding of where a country is at any given point, and what are the different financiers, be it multilateral banks, be it private sector, be it bilateral, what can they bring in order to address the issues at stake, but do this in a partnership, do this coordinated, and really have a really good understanding of what the government wants and what the government really needs. And I think we have, for the longest time, used financial instruments that by themselves have invested in nature, have invested in biodiversity, but have really sort of focused on the input side and less on the impact side or on the outcome side. And I think that is sort of a shift which we really want to foster, focusing on what is it what countries need and what is it what countries are really there for, in order to have bespoke or have tailored solutions for problems that cannot be addressed by general instruments. And I think in this respect, we have a number of different instruments, but not all of these instruments, be it development policy lending, be it investment lending, or innovative instruments that the wildlife conservation bond, for example. I know that IDB is currently also looking at the Jaguar bond. We have a project in South Africa called the Rhino bond, where really we're looking at performance and really bringing different finance instruments together and rewarding impact on the ground and really moving the needle by hand. What does this also entail, and what does it require is capacity. And I think, sorry.
Yeah. No, please.
No, I just wanted to sort of, as a final point, I do think that it is very important to not only, as I said, also look at the input, but also to foster the capacity and improve the capacity on the ground, really having partners and counterparts in government and in the private sector, but also in civil society, that fully understands what is it, what these different instruments bring, and what are the pros and cons in choosing an instrument. And it needs to be in a consortium of different players, different counterparts, different partners to work together and really have in mind the best outcome for a given
Thank you. Finally, you make a good conclusion of this first question on these two aspects of financing, not only new finance for biodiversity, but which is greening the finance, but also for modifying the current finance as financing as greening finance. And above all, this idea of working for and listening to the needs of your clients, if I may, and perhaps not the contrary, and working and building together what the project can be and investing. So thanks a lot for that. Now I would like you to go more in depth in what you are doing and concretely explain to all the people here what you are doing, what you are developing as innovative financial mechanism. You spoke a bit of that in the first question, but now can you explain us what you are developing and how you are supporting your client concretely? Perhaps I thought Camillo with Nature Debt Swap or your Jaguar bond as you want, because there are two really new and very interesting examples of what IDB is doing. Sure.
I would also try to connect with what Christian was saying in the sense that I mean the role of MDBs goes beyond fiscal planning and supporting the ministries of finance to move forward the biodiversity and nature agenda, the nature positive agenda, and help connect and align these global targets of the global biodiversity framework with the national and local agenda and targets. Everything also in alignment with the science, science-based targets. This is basic. Specifically at the Natural Capital Lab, we work transversely with IDB Invest with an IDB Lab. So, for example, we also support transactions like seed funding of Terrazos, and then which we are very proud, and I'm super happy that Terrazos was presenting here yesterday, because I would love to say that it has shared so many experiences that we are now replicating with public policies, not only in Colombia, but Peru, Panama, and other countries are learning from how to set biodiversity credits and public policies for nature positive agendas. And that said, on the entrepreneurship side of it, I mean, with IDB Invest, which is the corporate side of it, we also are designing these thematic bonds into nature, which is beyond collaborations around treasury bonds and fiscal planning, which I will go into with the nature debt swaps. I mean, also supporting companies also to green their and to become nature positive in their DNA and in their business model, which is we don't really change the business models of the companies, and we're still just supporting everything on a marginal and a very aside. I mean, we're not tackling the issue at its core. But coming again to the nature for debt swaps, and specifically of what we've done with the Galapagos and what we're planning to do also with the Jaguar bond, it is very important again to say that collaboration between MDBs is crucial. Setting a taxonomy for nature positive is being done across the NDBs, and it's going to be launched publicly at COP. Setting these taxonomies, for example, of what is a species bond, what is a Jaguar bond, and sharing and collaborating, for example, with the World Bank to if World Bank decides to use the taxonomy to launch a treasury bond for the Amazon under the collaboration that we are doing between World Bank and IDB, we'd be most happy that would occur. And this also is happening on the collaborations that we are creating with private sector, with our MDBs and NDBs to structure deals like the one done in Galapagos. So diving into it and trying to explain it quickly in the 2 minutes that I've got, and trying not to be so technical for everyone to understand. So the opportunity for countries who have such big debts and beyond the climate crisis and beyond the nature crisis, they have a fiscal crisis and a debt crisis. The opportunity of exchanging depth for conservation of nature and achieving biodiversity outcomes is what is the purpose of this whole structure. So bringing in private investors, bringing in institutional investors through blue bonds, and then creating a trust fund for the government to invest in, but then also savings of this, which could be described as portfolio purchase of loans. These savings, redirecting it to create a new trust fund, which in this case for the Ecuador is called the Hermandad Marine Reserve Trust Fund, and supporting with best practices how the government of that trust fund is going to occur, and what are the targets and best practices for the investments that the trust fund has to do between 2023 and 2041 is also the kind of support that IDB is giving to countries and to private entities structuring this kind of instruments. And last thing before I because I do believe it's the game changer of it all. We have been supporting, for example, the launch of a new kind of asset in the New York Stock Exchange, which is nature asset companies. Companies that are going to be using natural capital and ecosystem services as a way of proving outcomes, and people to be able to buy stocks in the New York Stock Exchange of these companies that are restoring and regenerating ecosystem services. I do believe is a game changer in the terms of understanding how to change the business model, and not only just bringing money to do the same stuff of conservation, and 10 years after asking, where do I get more money from?
Thank you. Very, very interesting examples. That was a word to Christian. I continue with the Multilateral Development Bank. Christian, can you give us also a concrete example of new financial mechanism, or concretely what you are financing? Perhaps a bit different from IDB, what Camilo explained to us. And you have 4 minutes, Christian.
Yeah. So just quickly. So I think one of the things which we really look at, and this is sort of where we're coming from, is that the financing will never be enough. So we as an institution, everybody will I guess recognize that we need to work together. And I think when we discuss also what at going to COP15, we need to look at what are the different mechanisms that we can use in this, and how can we bring in private finance. And so I think one of the interesting things which we have been doing, for example, in Mozambique, is really to piloting PPPs, private and public partnerships, to scale up investments in nature. So there is a portfolio which Mozambique has that looks at different financial solutions to increase investments in nature action. So there's a 2-phase World Bank Mozambique program called MozBio that supports co-management between governments, non-profits, but also with private organizations, and that manage conservation areas and finance, for example, anti-poaching activities. Really sort of very clearly targeted biodiversity finance. And this PPP structure blends private investment in commercial nature-based activities, both with public and philanthropic investments in conservation. And this is a total of $200 million. So if you look at this and you say, well, this is one country, it's a combined investment of $200 million that we as the World Bank alone wouldn't be able to fund. So this model now is replicated across the country and is attracting investment in rural areas. It develops the tourism sector, and it really focuses on nature conservation. And then there is a matching grant mechanism that is piloted under the second phase of this program that also supports the establishment of small and medium-sized nature-friendly business in looking at conservation conservation area buffer zones. So this mechanism has then really provided financing for innovative initiatives that are based on the ground and in this case also have a very strong sustainable link to it. So that's a very concrete example. But at the same time, the World Bank mobilizes capital markets to scale up sustainable development investment. So IBRD, the sort of the market base for the more advanced countries, is an important source for financing and has raised $50 billion each year from private investors in the debt market via sustainable development bonds and green bonds. So the World Bank bonds proceeds finance then sustainable development in member countries and contribute to the SDGs. And then while these proceeds are not earmarked by virtue to support the portfolios, they support investment in nature in countries. We have examples from Argentina, Mexico, Tunisia. And since 2018, IDA, which is the investment arm for the poorer countries, has also raised funds on the capital markets to supplement funds provided by donors, scaling up concessional financing available to poor countries. Because this is what I think is the most important thing. What we have to look now is how can we, one thing is to go to the market, access finance from the market, but at the same time, there needs to be concessional financing available that really helps countries to focus on those nature investments, which otherwise they would not do. So there needs to be a possibility to bring down the cost of the borrowing through concessional finance. So these are sort of a very concrete example, but then sort of an example that we have a lot of experience with, and I can go on talking about the Rhino one, but Camilo has already mentioned this there. So I think there are a number of different elements at different levels where we are working on. And one of the most important thing I think for us is really to look at this now, look at the examples, learn from others, and there's nothing which we have to say this is our idea and we are the only ones who can implement it. If there are other ideas out there which are better, which are much more appropriate for a given country, let's work together with somebody else or even co-finance somebody else in order.
Thanks a lot, Christian. So using classical finance, if I can say, and developing an innovation, a lot of innovation I see for biodiversity. That's on the NDB side. That's really really interesting and really wonderful around biodiversity, and with this strong focus of partnership between you and with the private sector and with your client for sure. So now, the private sector, what concretely can you give us an example? You said that it's a beginning, but nevertheless,
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned the central bank, because right when the pandemic was started, the central bank and the Ministry of Finance and the bank institutions, they made the Committee for Sustainable Finance. And it was very interesting because that's the government one. And then there's one of the private sector. And the first year, like 4 years ago, the first thing that they did was talk to the pension funds and say, whenever there is a etiquetado, a bond, an earmarked bond, you are the first one to buy it. And they have kept their word. So every time we have an earmarked bond or a sustainability bond, it's always oversubscribed, always, like 2 or 3 times oversubscribed. So we have the investors. I think when listening to you all, I think that what we need is a translator, because the biodiversity side is not very clear for the investor. So now that you said that you're going to have this biodiversity, I don't know, instrument in the stock exchange, in the New York Stock Exchange, that's very good, because when we say to the institutional investor, and there is this index or whatever, this that gives you the right information in the future, and you have your investment is safe, that will really, I think, click for them, and it would be a very good idea and a very good way to start to bring in the institutional investors towards biodiversity. But we need to have this kind of translation, how do we explain to them why this is important? The central bank is, the Mexican central bank is the greenest central bank that I know. They are really into it, but we need to convince the institutional investors, I think.
Yes, and there are several initiatives like that. As you say, the central banks, now the NGFS, the Network for Greening the Financial Sector, that's the network of central banks, are working on biodiversity a lot. You have also the TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, and they did a huge work to more or less translate biodiversity or nature wording to financial wording. And sometimes when I read the documents, I have to translate in my mind and say what they want to say, because that's translated in financial words. So, but there are a lot of initiatives now for the private sector to explain exactly what you are saying, what it is, what they can do, and allowing them also to be able to say what they are doing in reporting and disclosing. So thanks a lot to you all. I would stop now and give you the floor for some 5 minutes if you have questions on this specific part, and we'll come back with the gender part afterwards. So do you have any question to our 4 panelists? That was which? Yes, please. Can you please tell us who you are and ask your question?
Good morning. I am Deepthi from India. I have a general question that, I would like you to think upon and guide us. While working on nature-based solutions, designing and implementing those solutions, practitioners generally, I would say, community-based organizations, CSOs and all, generally find it a bit difficult to fit into the financial institution or the multilaterals and bilaterals sectoral themes, because I understand there are definite sectors defined as thematic priorities by the financial institutions, but nature-based solutions, on the other hand, have different elements: water, biodiversity, community, livestock. There are abiotic and biotic components, a lot of them that might fall into all the sectors, multiple sectors within a financial institution's domain. So how do you think, do you think that our financial institutions need to have a relook, need to reorganize to facilitate more funding, to be more accessible for CBOs, to be, putting in ideas forward for nature-based solutions, which are obviously multi-sectoral? It will be helpful if you could guide us. Thank you.
Thank you. Who want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, you're completely right. And sometimes this is difficult because we are at such a high level. I mean, MDBs is kind of trickling down through ministries of finance and supporting national development banks. And part of our work is actually supporting national development banks to get to this green finance and nature positive finance and taxonomy, and implement nature risk. We've already achieved so many things in climate risk, but we must do it so fast in terms of nature. But how to access and to get to local communities and to implement nature-based solutions. Actually, I was reading this morning the blended finance report, and part of the key conclusions of it is aggregation platforms. So national development banks, part of what they do is to aggregate projects for institutional investors to be able to pour down $2 billion or these kind of huge investments, because that's the issue that we actually have to tackle: how to pour down $100 million into 20K projects. So aggregators is what we need, actually. People who are bridging the between community organizations and nature-based solutions into urban planning, for example. Private developers that are integrating nature-based solutions into urban planning, but setting these trust funds where institutional investors can invest in. But to aggregate, we need the middlemen. We are used to talking about middlemen as the bad guy on the value chain, but sometimes the middleman has a very important role, which is aggregating, standardizing, make sure that everyone is talking the same language in terms of KPIs and science-based targets, that we have integrity level projects or as Terrazos was showing us, exceptional nature positive projects?
Last week in Monterrey, Mexico, the new stock exchange and B Corps, we reached an agreement to help the small B Corps to go into the stock exchange. Actually, it's a very good thing for the stock exchange because, as you know, worldwide companies have been delisting from the stock exchange. So this is bringing in the small and medium-sized companies to this kind of finance. So that's, I think, a very good idea.
Yes, there are also intermediate financing, so funds or banks. And Christian, yes, I know you want to.
Just quickly, and I do think that one of the things is really knowledge, so the sharing of knowledge and the curating of knowledge, really making sure is that I think there's too little knowledge out there, what has worked and what was the impact on the ground and what can actually be also scaled up. And I think that is sort of the crux of the matter is that, as you said, it's a multi-sector. These solutions are in different sectors with different institutions, with different specialists working in these different areas. And I think the better we have an understanding from the ground up, what has worked, how did it work, why did it come together? Because even if something has worked well in one country, it may not necessarily be that this will work in another country as well, because the institutional setup is different, the capacity is different. So I think we sort of need to look at this to the extent of how can we learn from these different experiences, how can we bring these different experiences together, and how can we also sort of look at good examples and that could be the low-hanging fruit in order to engage in something that could then lead towards sort of a full knowledge and how should I say it? So that you have all of these different experiences on your fingertips and can say, here is something that has worked in this country. Bring these different things together, bring these different communities together, and really learn from each other.
Thank you. Any other?
Could I add just something very quick that
Yes.
I think that it's very important to talk about also about what new generations are bringing in, because we've talked about these instruments of traditional finance and stock exchange, which is a little bit of BG wording, I believe. So, but talking into new set generation, it's about blockchain, it's about geospatial information systems, it's about understanding that already decentralized finance is moving already $2 billion. So how can we tap into these kind of new assets, and how can we use as MRV systems and technology to track, do traceability, and create participative platforms? I think that's also questions on what is that we are looking forward into the next 10 or 15 years, and the use of technology, not only in geospatial information, but also use of artificial intelligence, use of monitoring systems, because we need to be able to prove that what we are saying is what is being done in the territory. To stop the just greenwashing, speaking out loud. And nowadays, there's possibility to know even the composition of water and rivers, and to know what the chemical composed soil regeneration with that's the thing that we should be looking also forward into.
Looking to the future. Yes, for sure. We will have time for question at the end, because I really want to go to the next part. But before, I would ask Sébastien to give his impression of the two first questions, what he heard. You are heading a think tank, you are used to that, and I would like really to hear you on this first part of this session, and after that we'll come to the gender. And if you want also to say some words on the gender, welcome.
Thank you very much, Odile. And I think I just wanted to underline a few elements that I think were extremely important in what we heard, and particularly because I just want us to be able to compare with what's happening on decarbonization, because it seems as biodiversity is very complicated. I think what you've all said is that with the TNFD, for instance, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Risk Disclosure, we have reached a level where actually investors could between what is nature positive and what is not positive for nature. It's more complicated than on carbon, but I think we have a level of transparency that is now possible. And I think that's really something that matters a lot in terms of understanding where you should invest if you want to be nature positive. The other thing that I think is extremely present, I just want to underline it because it's a very important discussion in the field of the reform of the international financial architecture, is that one of the key progresses that is currently happening is that MDBs, multilateral development banks, work as a system. And that's exactly what Christian and sorry, the colleague from IADB, I forgot your first name, I'm very sorry for that. But this is exactly what you are illustrating. And this is sorry, I'm very sorry. This is extremely important. And it seems as it's very easy because you two are working together. But this is something that is a major progress that still needs to be made, that is undergoing. But I think I wanted just to stress that because in what we hear in global reforms on how to solve the problems of access to finance for the most vulnerable countries, this is one of the key points. If multilateral development banks work together, they can also reduce the cost of capital for specific projects because their risks are not the same if they work together, for instance. And that seems very obvious, but this is actually a very important point. The last thing that I wanted to say is that I very often, and you could hear that, for instance, in the African Climate Summit in Nairobi, that was about climate, but that was also about forests and biodiversity. Civil society was really against the focus that was done in that summit on carbon markets. Maybe, I don't know if the civil society was right, but I think what we hear today in this panel is that carbon markets, biodiversity credits, are an important part of the solution, but are not a substitute to fiscal policies, to supply chains agreements, to other types of payment for ecosystem services, and to redirecting subsidies. And I think that's also something that I wanted to stress because, again, it seems so consensual among all the panelists, but it's not consensual everywhere. And you see a lot of focus. I was in New York around the UNGA in September, the United Nations General Assembly, and everybody in New York was only talking about carbon markets and biodiversity credits. And I think that's not enough because, of course, for some of the projects that are not very lack still or are still perceived by the private financial players as not very attractive, having carbon credits or biodiversity credits could be a way to just fund the project. But it's not necessarily. But this is just in the conjunction with other instruments that have been mentioned. And sorry, I stated it was my last point. My very last point is to say, I think to the issue of having projects that are too small or not really recognized by private players, I really concur with the fact that we need to have aggregators, but that this is also why I was speaking of investment plans, investment programs. This is exactly the same for decarbonized or renewable energy. They are maybe too small, but when you look at an investment plan at the scale of a whole region or the whole country, then that seems as something around which you can aggregate different public and private financial institutions. So thanks a lot, and I think I shut up here to give more space for the conversation.
Thank you, Sebastian. It's more or less a great synthesis and challenging also what has been said. So now I come to the third question, and we spoke about mechanisms.
Hello?
Yes. So as it was said yesterday several times, biodiversity, climate change also okay, but with people and with a community, and in communities, IPLCs or other communities, women especially. How can we further integrate a gender-responsive approach into biodiversity and nature-based solutions? And what are the key benefits of doing so? So what do you think of that? Are you working on that? We lost our two other panelists, but I will come back. I guess, yes, you can start.
Can you hear me?
We have one gender-based bond for FIDA, who is a development bank concentrated on the field, on the campo. Rural, thank you. Our rural bank, it has this bond on gender. And it's particularly, it's very important because they finance only the rural areas that are women-based projects. And they have had a lot of progress because not many women had access to the financial institutions and to financial instruments. That was the first bond, and now they are going to the second bond. So it's a very important. The rest of the financial sector, I think, are not yet very well but this is the government bank, and probably the rest of the banks. Some of the private banks already have some gender products for women, but not for the rural and not linked to biodiversity. So maybe we need to do the link on gender and biodiversity.
Camillo, what happens at the bid also on that, on mechanism, but also on the way to work with communities and perhaps with also women in the project you are financing?
I do think that this question is very interesting and important in the sense that what we are looking forward is how to deepen the collaboration and understand what others can bring to the table. So women-led companies have different value systems, different ways of governance, and different set of skills, and but also indigenous communities and ancestral knowledge systems. We were talking about this yesterday in other panels, and I do believe that this is very interesting and important to do. And for example, under the collaboration between the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank for the Amazon region, we are working on urban planning for Amazon cities, for example, understanding what are the necessities for Amazon cities and what is the role of women in the family, in an indigenous community, in an Amazon city. I mean, this is a complex issue, and which we haven't really looked in the past years. But being very specific, I mean, what we have agreed between multilateral development banks and others financing institutions is to set specific KPIs for women-led companies, for gender, for indigenous peoples, and understanding how to explicitly value their inclusion and their participation, not only as beneficiaries, but really as decision takers on the design of policies and instruments.
Christian, at the World Bank, very quickly.
Okay, yeah. So quickly, I think, and this doesn't need to be said, I think women not only make a significant contribution to many of the nature-based sectors, but it is actually that they are the ones really driving these economies. And I think if we're really interested in integrating nature, integrating biodiversity into economic development, it is paramount to really make sure that we're taking gender into account or women into account when financing nature, managing natural resources that they depend on even more than others do. And so just as an example, we have a large umbrella trust fund called Go Blue, where we're looking at sort of the oceanic sector, and some of the statistics are really staggering. It's like 47% of the employees in the fishery sector are women. 90% of seafood processing workers are women, and in the tourism sector, it's more than 50%. So I think there is no way that an exclusion of women from the decision-making processes really is a way that can continue. So, and we, from the evidence we have, we know that increasing gender equality in the economy could actually add up to $13 billion to the global GDP by 2030. So the benefits are really clear, and therefore we on our side we have a gender strategy. we tag every single project gender. There's a gender tag for every single project, which we really make sure that we consider these issues. But it is not only women; it is also indigenous people. It is people. It is young, the youth that needs to be incorporated in this. And so I think what we really try to bring to bear is every single planning process for a investment program needs to have stakeholder consultations that are part of and enshrined in our environmental and social framework that sort of drive our environmental and social risk management. Because the understanding is really, if you don't do it, there's a higher risk to it that you're not succeed. And therefore, I think this is a very strong and clear goal that we are.
Thanks a lot, and that's really good to hear that. Sébastien, you want to add something on this gender perspective?
No, I think what is to me really important is I'm not a specialist of the question, but I think it's very important that we look at investment plans and investment programs that start from the needs of the population of the local communities, and in that context, listening to what women entrepreneurs have to propose is very important. And I think if we take that perspective when we try to build investment programs from the bottom up, that's very important. That that's just a kind of obvious that we need to have a gender perspective in that perspective.
Thanks a lot to all. So now we have time. We have for questions, and that's good. So you can speak. Perhaps I will begin with an online questions. That's for you, Camillo, from Ramona Nakvi. I hope I say well the name. So she says that you made a useful clarification on the debt for nature swap recently achieved in Ecuador. This works in countries with nature and fiscal crisis. What about the others? What would be the incentives there in other countries which have perhaps not so high debt?
Sure. And this question actually allows me to broaden up a little bit about the IDB collaboration with other MDBs, in the sense that I've been talking a lot about the collaboration with the World Bank because there's an overlapping in Latin America, but there also are collaborations going on with the Caribbean Investment Bank, for example, and CAF, and also even with the Asian Development Bank, who is also a partner in the process of natural capital accounting and incorporating natural capital into national accounts. And in that sense, the question goes to understand, for example, what happens when a country doesn't have these specifics. Well, we don't use the same kind of instruments. It's not about forcing instruments into a context that doesn't apply, but Barbados or Belize have also had experiences of nature for debt swaps into a blue economy with similar experiences. Different amounts, different specifics on the governance issues and how to because this every solution is very detailed oriented and as we say, tailor-made, and also participative with the government and with communities and stakeholders. But what else? What other institutions? So I mean, what other instruments? Just not to leave that unsaid. I mean, we are doing also guarantees for public reforms, design of trust funds, such as we did in Chile, for example, setting up the first conservation trust fund. We're doing well, so many different kind of instruments, specifically with the necessities of local communities and the priorities that local communities start to I mean, participatively put into the agenda, because let's be clear, I mean, our clients are the countries, so we are answering to the calls of the countries. Is basically these instruments have been designed to respond to what the countries have been asking. In the 70s, they were asking for agricultural instruments with other kind of planning. Nowadays, are countries which are setting the agendas, and we are responding and answering to those agendas.
Thank you. You have the floor, so please.
Hello, I'm Joel. I'm a computer science student here at Universidad San Francisco de Quito. And my question goes again for you, Camilo. I agree with you, what you say about the nature stock. I think it's a game changer. And I think it's also a way for corporations to give the opportunity to maybe contribute to the environment with these stocks. So my question is, what can it be done so we can leverage the nature and biodiversity of Ecuador? So in the future, we can see maybe a Galapagos stock or an Amazonic stock.
Thank you for your question. Because to understand that valuing natural capital and creating natural asset companies that can be in a world-renowned stock exchange and become an alternative for investors. It's different of just creating a regenerative index, let's say, that which any company can just say how regenerative they are and just value how they're regenerative are becoming. What we are doing is creating a new kind of asset. But I think that is too long and very technical to go into right now. But you can find this in the website if you look out for nature asset companies in the SEC in New York Stock Exchange. It was launched by Bloomberg and it's all over the internet. But answering to the question, I mean, Ecuador set this trust fund for the Galapagos using the nature for the swap. And actually, Ecuador is a champion, a world-class champion in using nature positive finance for conservation. And it's a global champion when it says, no, we know now that we don't need extractive industries to fund our schools and hospitals, and we can say no to extractive industries in the Yasuni Park, and we are looking forward to new set of instruments that can fund development necessities and requirements and desires. And this is the youth also that is speaking, and it's taking up the wheel and driving towards a nature positive future.
We can applaud Ecuador, I think. Christian, do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to come in. I do think that this is, but I think what we need to take into consideration is really that this is the moment to do this. Every single economy is trying to decarbonize. So I think and many of our client countries depend, as Camilo was saying, depend on fossil fuel revenue. And given the decarbonization push, this will last for a number of years, but then how long and what will happen then? So I think if you really, this is the time to diversify. I think it is also a time where we have dwindling resources. For example, cases like Gabon, cases like Equatorial Guinea, Congo, Brazzaville, they all have a long and well-run machine using these resources. And in the case of Gabon, for example, they have used these resources in order to protect biodiversity. And now they're realizing that, of course, they have done a really good job. And I think in many countries in Latin America, it can be the case, is that they haven't benefited from some of these financial flows, be it for carbon finance, because they haven't deforested. Like Gabon, for example, they haven't deforested. They have really taken care of their resources, and And now they're having these dwindling resources, but they realize, but we're having done a good job. So how can we actually benefit from these financial flows? And I think this is where this discussion needs to go. And in this perspective, I think that the theme of this biodiversity and development is really what this is all about. Really to sort of use these resources in a way that can help to transition out of many of these fossil or of these carbon-intensive economies and really use these resources in a much better way and transform economies, transform financial flows, transform entrepreneurial companies or entrepreneurialism in a way that we haven't seen so far. And I think this requires, as I said before, this requires a shift. It requires also a lot of understanding of these different instruments. And as Milo said, this is complicated. And if we want to bring people around the table, we need to make sure that they understand this. We need to use language that is understandable, and that, or we build the capacity, and we have the institutional capacity to. So this is the moment really to do this. And I think the more we can capture these opportunities, and the more we make sure that we scale up, the more we make sure that we share this information, and we don't hold on to this and saying, this is ours, this is what we have invented, so we only can do it, but really put it out there, open access to this information, open access to these different things. I think that is really the key in order to make this.
Lisa, you want to add? Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to add a little bit, something that you mentioned about the TNFC and also the incentives. If we take a look at how companies have been responding to the information of the the TFD, thank you, of the climate change, you know, they have been responding. It has taken a time for them to really have this change. But now that the TNFC is coming, that the nature, they have to start think about how are they impacting nature and what are they going to do. And probably in the next few days, if we, the next few years, if we meet here like in 5 years, or I hope less than 5 years, companies are going to have these incentives to be working on this. I think it's just beginning.
Yeah, it's just beginning. It's not mandatory even for climate, but it's push company to act. Last word, and perhaps Sebastian also, I don't know if you want to answer, and we'll go to the conclusion. So Camilo.
Just because, I mean, the Jaguar bond has been asked so much and I haven't said anything about it, and just make use of this time to say that actually AFD was our first partner when we answered to Costa Rica, when Costa Rica said, well, we are funding all of our ecosystems results payments with funding of a tax on gasoline, on gas, but we are moving into a decarbonized agenda. So where are we going to get this funding from to keep on paying for ecosystem services to communities and to regenerate ecosystems? And that's where the whole design of the Jaguar bond started, understanding how could we replace that funding stream, and then we understood that this could be applied not only for Costa Rica, but actually for the Mesoamerican biological corridor, which is the corridor of the jaguar. And the jaguar is a migrant species that connects actually from Mexico down to Argentina. So what we're doing with understanding this problematic of the silos that have been created for biodiversity in between the Amazon and the Mesoamerican biological corridor is what we are trying to tackle with this instrument on how to connect biodiversity with land use management, and also answering to the necessities of countries, but also of families and the people in the land that are having issues when a jaguar comes and eats their cattle, or how can you implement best practices? And the first result is this taxonomy and set of KPIs that we're using to create, as I said before, private bonds, treasury bonds, or even impact bonds.
Sebastian, do you want to have a final word?
Yes, from my side, I was just trying to put the emphasis on something that Christian was saying, that we hear a lot from the countries who have quite well protected forest areas that they cannot access carbon markets because maintaining a stock is not remunerated on carbon markets, and I think that principle should be maintained because else it's not a carbon market. But then definitely we need to find ways to foster sustainable development in those areas and not just say that they are going to be out of any type of sustainable development. And that's where I believe we should think of biodiversity credits. But not only that, I think a lot of what we heard today is about thinking of who are the people who are the economic players in those areas. And for instance, the wood industry might be very destructive of biodiversity, but there are also ways to have a forest timber industry. Sorry if my naming was not right in English, but the timber industry could be. There are ways to find where the timber industry could be managed in a way that is positive, still stays positive for biodiversity, and brings back enough income to the territory so that the people in the territory are not attracted to other more extractive types of development. I'm not saying that this is always functioning, but I think we need also to think of the economic players in those areas and not just trying to pour money from carbon markets, because that's probably something that is not going to function very well if we want to maintain the principles. And so I heard a lot of very interesting ideas where we have a mix of innovative instruments that can be brought into to the table to find a way to attract the necessary investments to those areas.
So I've been told that we just have 1 minute, so sorry for that. No more time for question, but just time for conclusion. To say, but a lot have been said, and I won't repeat. But what I heard today, beginning with, we need a lot of money. There is a lot of bad money or negative money that should be transformed in positive money, if I may say that like that. I would say that what you all said is really positive. It's not the end. We all know that it's complicated and so on, but we heard today a lot of innovative mechanisms that are being developed, a new way, perhaps, if I can say, of financing also, with a lot of partnership between MDBs, with the private sector, and above all, with the clients and the community, hearing what are their needs and providing solutions. Yes, I stop. So that's really encouraging, really. And I thank you all, the four of you, for this in my mind, very interesting session and panel, and I hope you find it interesting. Thanks a lot to all of you.
Thank you. Much appreciated. And sorry for being late.